Chanel Banks woke up to the sound of her alarm clock and didn't immediately realize that today was Wednesday, the day of her weekly visit to Mercy Hill Clinic. She sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her temples. Last night's glass of wine, or rather 3 glasses, after a difficult day with her students was clearly not the best idea. But what could she do? Teaching modern American literature to sophomores, most of whom had barely made it through To Kill a Mockingbird in high school, could drive anyone to despair. A shower helped her wake up. Chanel wrapped herself in a towel and stood in front of the mirror, critically examining her reflection. At 30, she still looked stunning. Not a single gray hair among her tight curls, not a single wrinkle around her eyes. Her skin was smooth as silk, thanks to her monthly treatments at the Ebony Glow beauty salon. She could afford it. Lionel's insurance paid a decent amount every month. Lionel. He flashed into her mind for a moment, an image from the past before the accident. Tall, with perfect posture, as befitted an architect, always in a well-fitting suit. He was so charming, so promising. A senior partner at Eastern Design Bureau at 30, a real whiz kid. And now, he had been in a coma for 5 years after that damn accident on a slippery road during a rainstorm. 5 years, she had been officially married to a vegetable. Chanel pushed those thoughts away as she chose an outfit for the clinic. A modest, dark blue dress, pearl earrings, a gift from Lionel on their first anniversary, and minimal makeup. The role of a devoted wife required an appropriate wardrobe. Her phone buzzed with a message as she finished her makeup. Darnell. Dinner at 7 tonight? I booked a table at the Blue Lotus. Chanel smiled, imagining him right now, probably in his office, pretending to work on some important IT project, but thinking about her, about them, about what would happen tonight after dinner. I'll be there at 8, department meeting, she replied and added a heart. It was a lie. The department meeting had been moved to the following week, but she needed time after her visit to the clinic to change and get ready for her date. Darnell was Lionel's best friend from college, 20 years of friendship. She should probably be ashamed of their relationship, but she had long since stopped feeling shame. Life was too short to waste on regrets. Their story began 2 years after the accident. Darnell often visited Lionel, and sometimes they ran into each other at the clinic. Then they started having lunch together after their visits, and then just hanging out. He was there for her when things were especially hard. He understood what she was going through. After all, he loved Lionel too, in his own way, of course. And then, one evening, after a couple of glasses of wine on his porch, when she was once again crying about her fate, he just took her and kissed her, and she responded. That was 3 years ago. Since then, they have been meeting secretly, always cautiously. Norfolk is not such a big city, and they are both well known in their circles. And then, one evening, after a couple of glasses of wine on his porch, when she was once again crying about her fate, he just took her and kissed her, and she responded. That was 3 years ago. Since then, they have been meeting secretly, always cautiously. Norfolk is not such a big city, and they are both well known in their circles. She was a promising young literature teacher. He was the successful owner of an IT company that served half of the local businesses. Thinking about our date? Another message from Darnell interrupted her thoughts. Thinking about what I'm going to wear under my dress especially for you, Chanel replied, smiling at her reflection. She skipped breakfast as usual. She had to stop by the college before the clinic. She had classes from 9 to 11, then a visit to Lionel, and classes again from 2 to 4. Chanel had been teaching at Norfolk Community College for 7 years. She started right after grad school, when she and Lionel were just settling into the city. He had received an offer from the Eastern Project Bureau that was impossible to turn down. She had a degree in English literature and no particular prospects. Now she was an associate professor with a good chance of promotion next year. Her colleagues considered her an example of resilience, a young woman pursuing a career despite personal tragedy. If only they knew. Today's class went better than usual. They were discussing Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, and the students were surprisingly responsive. Perhaps it was because the main character was a black woman, like most of her students. Or perhaps it was because the theme of freedom and self-determination always resonated with young people. Professor Banks, Jamal, one of the few boys in the group, raised his hand. Do you think Jenny was right to leave her second husband for a younger man? Chanel smiled. Sometimes the students asked questions that hit the nail on the head. I think Jenny had a right to be happy, she replied, leaning on the table. After living with a violent first husband and a calculating second, she finally found someone she could be herself with. Isn't that what life is all about? Finding your true self and living according to it, regardless of social conventions. Noticing the time, Chanel ended the discussion and reminded the students of their homework. As she left the classroom, she caught Jamal's admiring gaze. He was a good student, cute and young, only 22, too young. Although that didn't stop her from fantasizing sometimes. But no, one secret affair in her life was more than enough. Stepping out into the parking lot, Chanel headed for her white Lexus, another purchase made possible by Lionel's insurance. Her husband had insisted on maximum coverage when they first got married. You never know what might happen, he said. How right he was. The Mercy Hill Clinic was located 20 minutes' drive from the college, in the green suburbs of Norfolk. It was a private institution with an impeccable reputation and, of course, corresponding prices. But insurance covered all the costs, and Chanel didn't have to worry about money. After parking, she took a bottle of perfume from the glove compartment, a neutral scent, not the sweet one she used for dates with Darnell, and sprayed a little on her wrists. Glancing in the rearview mirror, she checked her makeup and put on a sad expression, the one she put on every time she entered her husband's room. Nurse Agatha, sitting at the front desk as always, waved cheerfully at her. Mrs. Banks, Wednesday is your day. Mr. Banks is very calm today. Chanel smiled stiffly. Agatha said it as if Lionel might be restless, but he hadn't moved or spoken in 5 years. He just lay there, hooked up to machines, while his brain, or what was left of it, remained somewhere in the inaccessible depths. That's good, she replied, signing the visitor's log. Any changes? Agatha shook her head, and Chanel felt the familiar relief. She asked that question every time, and every time she got the same answer. And that was fine. As long as nothing changed, she could go on with her life, without Lionel, but with his money. Room 215 looked the same as it had last Wednesday, and the Wednesday before that. A spacious room with a large window overlooking the garden, a single bed with Lionel lying on his back, and a multitude of machines monitoring his condition. The table in the corner was covered with flowers that Chanel brought every month, and photos of their life together. Hello, dear, she said, approaching the bed and leaning down to kiss her husband's cool forehead. How are you today? The silence, broken only by the quiet beeping of the equipment, was her answer. Chanel sat down in a chair next to the bed and took Lionel's hand, thin with protruding veins. Physical therapy kept his muscles toned, but without conscious movement, they were still atrophying. I had an interesting class today, she began her weekly monologue. We discussed Zora Neale Hurston. Remember I told you about her? The students were surprisingly enthusiastic. She talked about work, the weather, what she saw on TV, everything except Darnell and her real life. Sometimes she felt like she was talking to herself, but the doctors insisted that talking was good for comatose patients. Something about stimulating brain activity. After sitting for the required 45 minutes, Chanel got up, kissed her husband on the forehead again, and left the room, feeling relieved. Another week was over, another checkmark in the caring for my husband column. As soon as she left the clinic, she took out her phone and dialed Lavinia, her cousin and closest friend. Lavinia was the only one who knew everything about her relationship with Darnell. Hi, I just got off the phone with Lionel, Chanel said as she got into the car. No change, as usual. Thank God, Lavinia replied. It's not that I don't want him to get better, but it would cause certain problems, Chanel finished for her. I know. Are you seeing Darnell tonight? Yes, at the Blue Lotus at 8, Chanel started the car. By the way, could you lend me that black dress? The one with the slit up to indecently? Lavinia smiled. Of course, take it. But be careful, it doesn't leave much to the imagination. That's the point, Chanel laughed. I'll pick you up at 6. Back at college, she had 2 more classes, then stopped by Lavinia's to pick up the dress and finally returned home to get ready for her date. Her and Lionel's house, now just her house, was a spacious two-story mansion in a nice neighborhood. Not too fancy, but elegant enough to impress. Lionel had chosen it when he was promoted to senior partner. "We need a place with enough rooms for children," he had said at the time. Children they never had. At first, they put it off. Careers, housing, financial stability. And then the accident happened. Chanel went into the bedroom, took off her work clothes, and went to the shower. The hot water washed away her fatigue and the role of the devoted wife she played at the clinic. In the evening, she would be herself, a passionate, vibrant woman, not the inconsolable wife of a vegetable. Lavinia's black dress fit like a glove, emphasizing all the advantages of her figure: a deep neckline, a slit on the thigh, an open back. Darnell would go crazy when he saw her. Finishing the look with high heels and massive gold earrings, Chanel assessed the result in the mirror. Perfect. On the way to the restaurant, she thought about her situation. On the one hand, she had the perfect life, a job she loved, a home, money, a lover. On the other hand, there was the constant fear that Lionel would wake up and everything would fall apart. She wouldn't be able to explain the last 5 years of her life to him. She couldn't tell him about Darnell, about the other men she had dated before him, about the trip to Paris paid for with the insurance money, about the closet full of designer clothes. But the chances of Lionel waking up were getting slimmer every year. The doctors were cautious but clear. After 5 years in a coma, the chances of a full recovery are extremely slim, Dr. Chang had said at the last consultation. Chanel caught herself thinking that sometimes she even hoped Lionel would never wake up. It was awful but honest. She was no longer the woman he loved, and he, if he woke up, would no longer be the man she married. Darnell was waiting for her at the entrance to the Blue Lotus, an elegant Pan-Asian restaurant expensive enough to weed out the casual crowd. He was wearing a dark gray suit that fit his athletic figure perfectly. Unlike the thin Lionel, Darnell was a large man, broad-shouldered and muscular. His time in the gym had paid off. "You look stunning," he said, kissing her on the cheek and holding the door open for her. "I know," Chanel smiled, enjoying his admiring gaze. They were shown to a table in the corner, secluded enough to talk without being overheard. Darnell ordered a bottle of champagne as soon as they sat down. "Celebrating something?" Chanel asked, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe," he replied evasively. "How's Lionel?" This question always came up in their conversations, usually at the beginning. It was a courtesy, an acknowledgement of the uncomfortable fact that there was a man between them whom they had both once loved. "Same as always," Chanel shrugged. "Same as always." "Good." Darnell nodded, and for a moment Chanel saw in his eyes the same relief she felt herself. When the champagne was brought, Darnell raised his glass. "To us," he said, looking into her eyes. "To us," she repeated, clinking glasses with him. "Chanel." Darnell put down his glass and took her hand. "I've been thinking about this for days. We've been together for 3 years. 3 years of secret meetings, caution, lies. I can't do this anymore." Chanel felt her heart sink. Was he really going to break up with her? Now, when she was just starting to really care about him? "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want us to be together. For real. Openly." Darnell squeezed her hand. "I want you to file for divorce." Chanel stared at him, unable to believe her ears. Divorce? From Lionel? But he's in a coma. And probably will be forever, Darnell said firmly. Chanel, you're young, beautiful, you have your whole life ahead of you. You can't stay tied to a man who will probably never wake up. But what will people say? What will our friends think? His family? Chanel shook her head. They'll hate me. They'll hate us both. I don't care. Darnell leaned closer. I love you. I want to be with you officially. I want to wake up next to you every morning, not just when we can arrange a date. Chanel took a sip of champagne, trying to collect her thoughts. Of course, she had thought about divorce, but it was one thing to think about it theoretically, and quite another to actually go to court and file for divorce from a man who was in a coma. What about insurance? She blurted out, immediately regretting her words. Darnell's face darkened for a moment. I make enough to support both of us, he said dryly. If you're worried about money— No, of course not. Chanel shook her head hastily. It's complicated, Darnell. I need time to think things through. How much time? He let go of her hand. Another 3 years? 5? 10? How much longer are we going to live like this, Chanel? She didn't know how to respond. To be honest, she enjoyed her current life. She had the status of a married woman without the burden of a husband. She had a lover, but she wasn't tied down by any commitments. And, of course, there was the insurance, a steady source of income that allowed her to live the way she wanted. If she divorced Lionel and married Darnell, everything would change. She would become financially dependent on him. She would have to take his opinions and desires into account. Goodbye, spontaneous purchases and trips. I need to think about it, she finally said. This is a serious step, Darnell. I can't decide in one evening. He sighed but nodded. Okay, I understand, but please don't take too long. I'm tired of waiting. The rest of the dinner was spent in a tense atmosphere. They talked about work and mutual acquaintances, but the former ease was gone. Chanel could sense that Darnell was disappointed by her reaction, and it ruined the evening. When they left the restaurant, he suggested they go to his place, but she declined, citing a headache. It was a lie, but she needed to be alone to think about his proposal. When she got home, Chanel went straight to the bathroom. After removing her makeup and changing into her pajamas, she climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling. Divorce. Such a simple word, but how much it changed everything. On the one hand, Darnell was right. She was young and couldn't stay tied to a man who would probably never wake up. On the other hand, officially divorcing her comatose husband would make her the most hated woman in their circle, especially if she immediately married his best friend. Her phone buzzed with a message. Darnell, sorry for pressuring you. I just want to be with you. I love you. Chanel didn't answer. She wasn't sure she loved Darnell. He was attractive, successful, caring. The sex was great. But love? She didn't know. Maybe she wasn't capable of real love. Chanel dozed off and woke up to the ringing of her phone. It was 3:15 a.m. Who could be calling at this hour? Hello? She answered sleepily. Mrs. Banks? This is Dr. Chang from Mercy Hill Clinic. The voice was agitated. I'm sorry to call so late, but I have news about your husband. Chanel sat up abruptly in bed, wide awake. Has something happened? Mrs. Banks, your husband is showing signs of waking up. He has opened his eyes and is responding to voice commands. I think you should come as soon as possible. Chanel raced through the empty night streets of Norfolk, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Sleep was gone, adrenaline pulsing in her temples. Lionel was showing signs of waking up. Lionel, who had been in a vegetative state for 5 years, had suddenly opened his eyes. If before his return had been an abstract threat, now it was becoming a reality. The Mercy Hill Clinic was quiet and half empty, with only the staff on duty and a security guard at the entrance. Chanel quickly went up to the second floor, fixing her hair and checking that her hastily applied lipstick hadn't smudged. Dr. Chang, a short man with a neatly trimmed beard, was waiting for her at the door of the ward. Mrs. Banks, thank you for coming so quickly, he said, extending his hand. We have some very encouraging developments. What exactly happened? Chanel shook his hand, trying to sound excited rather than frightened. At around 2 o'clock in the morning, a nurse noticed that your husband had opened his eyes. Not just a slight opening, as sometimes happens reflexively, but fully open, and he began to look around. When she spoke to him, he turned his head toward her. Then I asked him to blink if he could hear me, and he did, twice. Chanel leaned against the wall, feeling weak in her knees. This was no longer just a movement of the eyes, like yesterday. It was a conscious action. Did he say anything? Dr. Chang shook his head. No, verbal skills usually come back later, but the fact that he's responding to commands is a very good sign. His brain is functioning better than we expected. Can I see him? Of course. He's asleep again now, which is normal. Patients coming out of a coma often alternate between periods of wakefulness and sleep, but you can stay with him. If he wakes up, call the nurse. Chanel nodded and entered the ward. Lionel lay as usual, his eyes closed, but something had changed imperceptibly. Perhaps his expression was less relaxed or his body position was different. She couldn't tell for sure. She sat down carefully on a chair next to the bed. not daring to take his hand as she usually did. What if he woke up when she touched him? What would she say to him? Chanel took out her phone and texted Lavinia, "Lionel is awake. I'm at the clinic. Come as soon as you can." The reply came almost instantly. "Oh my God, I'm on my way." She sent the next message to Darnell. "Lionel is showing signs of waking up. Don't call me. I'll text you later." She turned off the sound on her phone and put it in her bag. The last thing she needed right now was a call from Darnell in front of the nurses or, God forbid, in front of Lionel when he woke up. The clock on the wall showed that it was almost 4 in the morning. Chanel looked at her husband, trying to imagine what would happen next. If he regained consciousness completely, started talking and moving, remembered their past, what then? Would she be able to return to her role as a loving wife? Would she want to? The door opened quietly, and a nurse entered the room. Not Agatha, but the night shift, a young woman whose name Chanel didn't remember. "How is he?" the nurse asked, checking the readings on the monitors. "He's still asleep," Chanel replied. "When do you think he'll wake up?" "It's hard to say. Maybe in an hour, maybe in the morning. Don't worry, it's a normal process," the nurse smiled. "Would you like some coffee? We have some good coffee in the staff room." "Yes, thank you." Chanel nodded gratefully. Caffeine was exactly what she needed right now. When the nurse left, Chanel took out her phone again. Darnell had sent a series of messages. "What do you mean, signs of waking up? Is he talking? Moving?" "Chanel, answer me." She sighed and wrote, "He opened his eyes and is responding to voices. Not talking, I'm at the clinic. Please don't call." The reply came instantly. "Should I come?" "No!" Chanel almost wrote it in capital letters, but stopped herself. "No, don't. I'll be fine. I'll call you later." At that moment, she heard a rustle from the bed and looked up sharply. Lionel was staring at her. His eyes, once warm and loving, were wide open and filled with, what? Recognition, confusion, accusation? "Lionel?" Her voice sounded hoarse. "Can you hear me?" He didn't answer, but his gaze remained fixed on her face. Chanel felt a chill run down her spine. There was something disturbing, almost predatory in that look. I'll call the doctor," she said, standing up. But at that moment, Lionel's hand, thin, with protruding veins, twitched on the blanket as if he wanted to stop her. Chanel froze. It was the first conscious movement she had seen in 5 years. Lionel was really coming back. "I'll be right back, I promise," she said, trying to sound encouraging. "I just need to tell the doctor you're awake." He blinked, slowly, deliberately, and Chanel rushed out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Dr. Chang was in his office, looking through some papers. "He's awake," Chanel blurted out. "And he moved his hand." The doctor stood up immediately. "That's excellent news. Let's take a look." When they returned to the room, Lionel was lying with his eyes closed again. "He was just conscious," Chanel said, confused. "Don't worry, that's normal," Dr. Chang reassured her. "As I said, patients often alternate between sleep and wakefulness. I'll take a look at him." While the doctor checked Lionel's pupils and vital signs, Chanel walked over to the window. Dawn was breaking outside, the pale pink sky promising a clear day. "All signs are stable," the doctor said after finishing his examination. "And improving. I'd say we're seeing very positive progress." "What's next?" Chanel asked. "I mean, when will he be able to, be normal?" Dr. Chang smiled knowingly. "The recovery process after a coma is unique for each patient. Some return to a full life in a matter of weeks, while others require months of rehabilitation. In your husband's case, given the length of the coma, I would say we have a long road ahead of us, but the early signs are very encouraging." "What about his memory? Will he remember everything?" "Long-term memory is usually the best preserved. Events before the coma, childhood, youth, these memories are likely to remain intact. But there may be problems with short-term memory. There may also be gaps, especially regarding the accident itself and the period immediately before it." Chanel nodded, trying to hide her relief. If Lionel didn't remember the last few days before the accident, that was good. They had had a big fight. She had accused him of working too much and not paying enough attention to her. He responded by saying that she was spending money faster than he could earn it. It was their last real conversation. "What about the time he was in a coma?" Could he hear or understand anything? Dr. Chang shrugged. Science still doesn't have a definitive answer to that question. Some patients who have come out of comas claim to have heard conversations around them, while others remember nothing. In any case, it's good that you visited him regularly and talked to him. Chanel felt the blood drain from her face. Could Lionel have heard her all these years? Hearing her talk about work and everyday things was one thing. But what if he had heard her phone conversations in the ward? The few times she had answered Darnell right by her husband's bed, thinking he was unaware? By 7 in the morning, Lavinia arrived at the clinic, sleepy but alarmed. Chanel met her in the hallway, away from Lionel's room. "What's wrong?" Lavinia hugged her cousin tightly. "Did he really wake up?" "Yes." Chanel looked around to make sure no one could hear them. He opened his eyes, responded to voices, even tried to move. "Lav, I'm panicking. What if he heard everything? All these years?" Lavinia frowned. "You mean about you and Darnell? And about him, and about the others, and about how I wasted money? God, I don't even remember everything I said on the phone while sitting at his bedside." "Calm down." Lavinia took her by the shoulders. "Even if he heard something, it doesn't mean he understood or remembered. His brain was damaged, remember?" Chanel took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. "You're right. Of course you're right. It's just the way he looked at me, Lav. When he looked at me, there was something in his eyes. I don't know how to explain it. It was like he knew something I didn't." "You're just panicking." Lavinia smiled gently. "Listen, whatever happens, we'll get through this. You'll get through this. You're a strong woman, Chanel." "Did Darnell call?" Chanel asked, taking her phone out of her bag. "No, but he sent a message around 5 this morning. He asked if I was with you." "Damn!" Chanel checked her messages. 3 more from Darnell, each more anxious than the last. "He doesn't understand that now is not the time." "You need to end things with him," Lavinia said firmly. "At least for now, until we know what's going on with Lionel and how he's recovering." "I know," Chanel rubbed her eyes wearily, "but Darnell isn't the type to back down easily, especially after yesterday's conversation about divorce." "What?" Lavinia's eyes widened. "He asked you to divorce Lionel? Now?" "Last night, at the restaurant. He said he was tired of secret meetings, that he wanted to be with me officially." Chanel smiled bitterly. "The irony of fate, isn't it? 5 years nothing happens, and then in one day, everything is turned upside down." At that moment, Dr. Chang came out of Lionel's room. "Mrs. Banks, your husband is awake again. He's trying to speak." Chanel and Lavinia exchanged worried glances before rushing into the room. Lionel was indeed conscious. His eyes followed them as they entered, and his lips moved slightly, as if he were trying to say something. "Lionel," Chanel approached the bed, trying to sound cheerful and confident. "It's me, Chanel, your wife, and this is Lavinia. Do you remember her?" He blinked, slowly, deliberately, and tried again to say something, but only a hoarse sound, not like words, came out of his throat. "Don't rush him, Mr. Banks," said Dr. Chang. "His vocal cords haven't been used in a long time. It will take time for them to work again." The next few weeks passed in a blur. Chanel was torn between the clinic and college, trying to keep up with everything. Lionel was recovering quickly. He could already say a few words, sit up in bed, and even try to stand with support. But his gaze remained wary, especially when he looked at his wife. Darnell insisted on meeting, and Chanel finally agreed to see him at a cafe near the clinic. "How is he?" Darnell asked as soon as she sat down at the table. "He's recovering," Chanel said, looking out the window, avoiding his gaze. "He can say a few words, move a little." "Chanel, what about us?" "I don't know," she shook her head. "Now is not the time to think about that." "Maybe for you," Darnell leaned across the table. "But I can't think about anything else. 5 years, Chanel. 5 years we waited for him to wake up, and now that we've finally decided to be together?" "I never promised you I'd leave him," she said sharply, "and certainly not now when he's just come out of a coma." "So you're choosing him?" Darnell's eyes narrowed. "I'm not choosing anything. I'm just saying that now is not the time for such decisions. I need a break, Darnell, at least a few months, until everything settles down." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "All right." But don't think I'll wait forever. 3 weeks passed. Lionel's condition improved day by day. He could already speak in short sentences, sit up on his own, and even take a few steps with support. His memory seemed to be intact. He recognized everyone who visited him and remembered events prior to the accident. But something about his behavior troubled Chanel. He rarely smiled in her presence, and sometimes she caught him studying her as if he were trying to solve some kind of puzzle. "When home?" he asked once when they were alone. "Soon, sweetie." Chanel stroked his hand. "The doctor says you're making great progress. Maybe in a week or two." Lionel nodded, but his eyes remained serious and assessing. "Darnell?" he asked suddenly. Chanel felt her heart skip a beat. "What about him?" "Where is Darnell?" He knows you're awake. He wants to see you when you're ready." Lionel stared at her so long and so intently that Chanel felt uncomfortable. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly, but something in his eyes said otherwise. Detective Ebony Hampton got out of her patrol car, adjusted her dark blue jacket, and looked around. Morning Norfolk greeted her with gray skies and drizzling rain. The elegant 2-story house in a prestigious neighborhood was surrounded by police cars and yellow tape. Despite the early hour, neighbors had already gathered in small groups on their lawns, talking and casting curious glances at the scene. Showing her badge to the officer on duty, Ebony walked under the tape. Sergeant Clark, a young but already graying patrolman with sad eyes, met her on the porch. "Detective Hampton," he nodded in greeting. "The body is on the first floor, in the guest bedroom. The housekeeper found it at 6:30 this morning when she came to work." "What do we know about the victim?" Ebony asked, putting on latex gloves. "Chanel Banks, 30 years old. Literature professor at Norfolk Community College. Preliminary examination indicates death occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. Multiple stab wounds." "Who lived with her?" "Her husband, Lionel Banks, 35 years old, architect. 5 years ago, he was in a car accident and was in a coma. He woke up about 2 months ago and was discharged from the clinic 2 weeks ago after rehabilitation. Now he's nowhere to be found." Ebony frowned. Was he able to move around on his own? According to the neighbors, only with the help of a walker or a wheelchair. "Interesting," the detective muttered as she entered the house. Inside, the mansion looked like something out of a glossy magazine. Exquisite furniture, expensive paintings on the walls, crystal chandeliers. There were no signs of a struggle or disorder in the main rooms. Ebony headed for the guest bedroom, where she could hear the voices of the forensic team. The room was furnished like a hospital ward, with a medical bed, special handrails, and physical therapy equipment. But that wasn't what caught the detective's attention. Chanel Banks lay on the floor between the bed and the door, in a pool of her own blood. She was wearing a silk nightgown, now soaked in dark red. Her once beautiful face was contorted with horror, her eyes wide open. Multiple stab wounds to her chest and abdomen left no doubt as to the cause of death. "Looks like a crime of passion," said forensic expert Dr. Riley, rising from his knees. "At least 15 stab wounds. The killer was clearly enraged." "Murder weapon?" "Judging by the wounds, a kitchen knife with a blade about 8 inches long. It's nowhere to be found." Ebony examined the body carefully without touching it. "Any signs of sexual assault?" "Number just the stab wounds." "Could she have come here on her own? Or was she brought here?" Dr. Riley pointed to a trail of blood leading from the door. "It appears she entered the room on her own, possibly after hearing a noise. She was attacked immediately and tried to crawl toward the door, but didn't make it." Ebony nodded and looked around the rest of the room. The medical bed was neatly made, but it was clear that no one had slept there that night. On the bedside table were medicines, a glass of water, and a photograph, Lionel and Chanel on their wedding day, young and happy. "Where's the master bedroom?" she asked Sergeant Clark. "Upstairs, first door on the right off the stairs." Going upstairs, Ebony found that the master bedroom looked untouched. The huge bed was neatly made, and everything was in its place. On the dressing table were expensive cosmetics, perfumes, and photographs in silver frames. There were no signs of a man's presence, no razor, no aftershave, nothing. It seemed that Chanel slept here alone, while her husband occupied the converted guest room downstairs. In the dressing room, Ebony discovered rows of designer clothes, dozens of pairs of shoes, and a collection of handbags from famous brands. Everything was women's. "Where are Mr. Banks' things?" she asked the housekeeper, an elderly woman named Ruth, who was waiting nervously in the hallway. "In the room downstairs," she replied. "He lived there after he was discharged from the clinic. Mrs. Banks said it was difficult for him to climb the stairs." "Did they get along well? Were there any arguments or tension?" Ruth hesitated. "I'm only here 3 times a week, Detective, but the atmosphere was strange. Mr. Banks hardly spoke, even to his wife, and she was always a little nervous around him." "Did you know that Mr. Banks had recently come out of a coma?" "Yes, Mrs. Banks told me. 5 years is a long time. I've been working here for 4 years and never saw him before he was discharged, only photographs." "And how did Mrs. Banks behave during that time, when her husband was in a coma?" Ruth hesitated again, clearly searching for the right words. "She lived her life. She worked, traveled. She had friends, visitors." "Men?" Ebony asked bluntly. "Sometimes," the housekeeper replied quietly. "But I didn't get involved in her affairs. She paid me to clean, not to gossip." Ebony nodded and continued her inspection. In the study on the first floor, she found a computer, stacks of papers, and bills. Opening a desk drawer, she found a folder with Lionel's medical records and insurance payments. The amounts were impressive. Premium insurance had provided Chanel with a very comfortable life all these years. By noon, Ebony was sitting in her office at the police station, studying the information she had gathered. In front of her lay a printout of Chanel's phone calls for the last month. Most of them were to a Lavinia Rochon, probably a relative, and Darnell Toomey. The amounts were impressive. Premium insurance had provided Chanel with a very comfortable life all these years. By noon, Ebony was sitting in her office at the police station, studying the information she had gathered. In front of her lay a printout of Chanel's phone calls for the last month. Most of them were to a Lavinia Rochon, probably a relative, and Darnell Toomey. The last call to Darnell was made the day before the murder, and the conversation lasted only 3 minutes. The door opened and Sergeant Clark entered. "Detective, we found Darnell Toomey. He's waiting in the interrogation room, and something else interesting. A wheelchair was found in the trash behind the house. It has blood on it that matches the victim's." Ebony raised an eyebrow. The last call to Darnell was made the day before the murder, and the conversation lasted only 3 minutes. The door opened and Sergeant Clark entered. "Detective, we found Darnell Toomey. He's waiting in the interrogation room, and something else interesting. A wheelchair was found in the trash behind the house. It has blood on it that matches the victim's." Ebony raised an eyebrow. "So our mysteriously missing husband may be more mobile than we thought." In the interrogation room, Darnell Toomey looked exhausted. A tall, well-built man with a short haircut and an expensive watch on his wrist, he drummed his fingers nervously on the table. "Mr. Toomey," Ebony sat down across from him. "Thank you for agreeing to talk to us. So our mysteriously missing husband may be more mobile than we thought." In the interrogation room, Darnell Toomey looked exhausted. A tall, well-built man with a short haircut and an expensive watch on his wrist, he drummed his fingers nervously on the table. "Mr. Toomey," Ebony sat down across from him. "Thank you for agreeing to talk to us. Did I have a choice?" He smiled bitterly. "I heard what happened to Chanel. It's unbelievable. Who could have done such a thing?" "That's what we're trying to find out. Tell us about your relationship with Mrs. Banks." Darnell hesitated. "We were friends. I'm best friends with her husband, Lionel. We've known each other since college." "Just friends?" Ebony raised an eyebrow. He lowered his eyes. "Did I have a choice?" He smiled bitterly. "I heard what happened to Chanel. It's unbelievable. Who could have done such a thing?" "That's what we're trying to find out. Tell us about your relationship with Mrs. Banks." Darnell hesitated. "We were friends. I'm best friends with her husband, Lionel. We've known each other since college." "Just friends?" Ebony raised an eyebrow. He lowered his eyes. "Look, Lionel has been in a coma for 5 years. 5 years. Chanel was a young woman alone. We grew close. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed of it either. We didn't hurt anyone. When did your relationship start? About 3 years ago. At first, I was just supporting her, helping with insurance paperwork, visiting Lionel with her sometimes. Then, everything changed. And when did Mr. Banks wake up? Look, Lionel has been in a coma for 5 years. 5 years. Chanel was a young woman alone. We grew close. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed of it either. We didn't hurt anyone. When did your relationship start? About 3 years ago. At first, I was just supporting her, helping with insurance paperwork, visiting Lionel with her sometimes. Then, everything changed. And when did Mr. Banks wake up? Darnell's face darkened. It was 2 months ago. Chanel called me in the middle of the night and said that Lionel was showing signs of waking up. We decided to take a break from our relationship, at least until it became clear how well he would recover. Was that your decision or hers? Hers, Darnell said, unable to hide his bitterness. I wanted to continue the relationship. I even suggested she file for divorce. When? Darnell's face darkened. It was 2 months ago. Chanel called me in the middle of the night and said that Lionel was showing signs of waking up. We decided to take a break from our relationship, at least until it became clear how well he would recover. Was that your decision or hers? Hers, Darnell said, unable to hide his bitterness. I wanted to continue the relationship. I even suggested she file for divorce. When? The day before she called about Lionel waking up. Damn irony, isn't it? Ebony made a note in her notebook. Have you seen Lionel since he was discharged from the clinic? Number Chanel thought it was too risky. She was afraid he might suspect something. Could he have? Suspected, I mean. Darnell shrugged. The day before she called about Lionel waking up. Damn irony, isn't it? Ebony made a note in her notebook. Have you seen Lionel since he was discharged from the clinic? Number Chanel thought it was too risky. She was afraid he might suspect something. Could he have? Suspected, I mean. Darnell shrugged. How? He was in a coma, although... He paused, as if remembering something. Although what? Chanel sometimes called me when she was in his room. She said he couldn't hear or understand anything. But who knows? Maybe some part of his brain was still working. How? He was in a coma, although... He paused, as if remembering something. Although what? Chanel sometimes called me when she was in his room. She said he couldn't hear or understand anything. But who knows? Maybe some part of his brain was still working. After the interview, Ebony went to Mercy Hill Clinic, where Lionel Banks had spent 5 years in a coma and another 6 weeks in rehabilitation. Dr. Chang, who was in charge of his treatment, agreed to meet with her in his office. Doctor, tell me about Mr. Banks's condition before he was discharged, Ebony asked, sitting down in a chair across from his desk. After the interview, Ebony went to Mercy Hill Clinic, where Lionel Banks had spent 5 years in a coma and another 6 weeks in rehabilitation. Dr. Chang, who was in charge of his treatment, agreed to meet with her in his office. Doctor, tell me about Mr. Banks's condition before he was discharged, Ebony asked, sitting down in a chair across from his desk. Dr. Chang, a short man with a neat beard, folded his hands in front of him. Mr. Banks showed remarkable progress for someone who had spent 5 years in a coma. By the time he was discharged, he could speak in short sentences, sit without support, and even take a few steps with the aid of a walker. His cognitive functions were steadily improving, his memory, attention span, and ability to learn. Could he move around on his own, without a wheelchair or walker? The doctor frowned. No, his muscles were still too weak. After 5 years of immobility, even with regular physical therapy, it takes months of rehabilitation to restore muscle tone. What about his memory? Did he remember events prior to the coma? Yes, his long-term memory was virtually intact. He remembered his life before the accident and recognized his wife, friends, and colleagues who came to visit him. What about events during the coma? Could he hear what was going on around him while he was unconscious? Dr. Chang paused. That's a difficult question. Science still doesn't have a definitive answer. Some patients who have come out of comas claim to have heard conversations around them, while others remember nothing. Mr. Banks never spoke about it directly. Was there anything unusual about his behavior after he woke up? Anything that concerned you? Dr. Chang tensed slightly. I wouldn't say concerned, but yes, there was something unusual. He was very observant. Most patients coming out of a coma are disoriented, confused. Mr. Banks, on the other hand, seemed focused, attentive, especially when his wife was around. He watched her, studied her. In the evening, Ebony called Lavinia Rochon, the victim's cousin, in for questioning. Lavinia was a slender woman in her 30s with short hair and a wary expression. Miss Rochon, thank you for agreeing to talk to us, the detective began. Please accept my condolences on the death of your cousin. Thank you, Lavinia replied quietly. I still can't believe it. Who could have done this to Chanel? That's what we're trying to find out. Were you close to your cousin? Yes, very. We grew up together. We were like sisters. I knew all her secrets. Including her relationship with Darnell Toomey? Lavinia sighed. Yes, I didn't approve of their relationship, especially considering that Darnell was Lionel's best friend. But Chanel had been very lonely all these years. I couldn't blame her. When was the last time you saw your cousin? 2 days ago. I stopped by their house to bring some books for Lionel. Chanel seemed tense. About what? Lionel. She said he'd been acting strange since he woke up. He barely spoke to her, looked at her as if he were studying her. She was afraid he knew something about her relationship with Darnell. Could he have known? Lavinia wondered. Theoretically, yes. Chanel sometimes talked to Darnell on the phone while sitting by Lionel's bed. She was sure he couldn't hear anything, but who knows? And there was something else strange when he first started coming around. What was that? He tried to say Darnell's name. It was one of the first words he tried to say. Chanel was very frightened at the time, but the doctor said it could have been just a random string of sounds. Ebony made a note in her notebook. How did Lionel behave after he was discharged? Did you notice anything unusual? He was focused. Most people after such a trauma would be confused, depressed, but not Lionel. He worked methodically on his recovery, doing exercises, speech therapy, and all the while he was watching Chanel, watching the house, watching everything that was going on around him. Do you think he might have been planning something? Lavinia swallowed nervously. I don't know. But one day I walked into his room without knocking and saw him standing at the window. No walker, no support. Just standing there, looking out at the garden. When he heard me, he immediately grabbed the back of the bed, as if he needed something to hold on to. But at that moment, he looked perfectly steady. After talking to Lavinia, Ebony returned to her office, where Sergeant Clark was waiting for her with new information. Detective, we have a lead. Lionel Banks's credit card was used last night at a motel on the outskirts of town. The manager remembers a man in a wheelchair, but isn't sure it was Banks. The visitor was wearing a cap and sunglasses, despite the evening hour. Send a patrol to check the motel and the surrounding area. If he was there yesterday, someone may have seen where he went next. Already done. And one more thing. Bloody clothes believed to belong to Lionel and several bottles of medication prescribed to him at the clinic were found in a trash can behind the Banks' house. Ebony tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the table. He's getting rid of evidence, and possibly the medication that was slowing his recovery. You think he was pretending to be weaker than he really was? I think Lionel Banks is a very intelligent man who spent 5 years in a coma, hearing and understanding everything that was going on around him. He learned about the betrayal of his wife and his best friend. He learned how they were spending his money, planning a future without him. And when he woke up, he decided to get revenge. But to do that, he had to pretend. Exactly. He pretended to be weaker than he really was to lull them into a false sense of security. He may have even deliberately slowed down his recovery by refusing to exercise or secretly throwing away his medication. All the while, he was watching, gathering information, and waiting for the right moment. And he chose it last night, the sergeant concluded grimly. Yes, Chanel probably heard a noise in his room and went to check. By that time he was ready, fully dressed, standing on his feet, knife in hand. Night fell on Norfolk when Ebony finally returned home. She kicked off her shoes, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat down on the couch, looking through the case files. Chanel Banks was a beautiful, successful woman leading a double life. Lionel Banks was a talented architect who had spent 5 years in a coma, forced to listen to his wife and best friend betray him. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Detective Hampton," she answered. "Detective, this is Sergeant Clark. We have new information. A camera at the bus station in Richmond captured a man who looks like Lionel Banks. He bought a ticket to Atlanta." "Was he alone?" "Yes, and what's interesting is that he was walking without any support, a little unsteady but on his own." Ebony nodded, though the sergeant couldn't see her. "Send a description to all bus stations along the route and contact the Atlanta police. This may be his final destination, or he may just be transferring." Hanging up, Ebony walked to the window and looked out at the city at night. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, was Lionel Banks, a man who had been trapped inside his own body for 5 years, listening to his life fall apart, unable to do anything about it. 5 years of planning, watching, waiting, and finally, revenge.